You're listening to the Partisan Comms Podcast.
There is a signal broadcast every second of every day through our television sets.
Welcome to episode 10. I'm Terrence. In this episode, we'll unravel the complex tapestry of the Troubles. We'll discuss the origins of the conflict, the formation of paramilitary groups, and examine the impact of violent events in a society that lived through the chaos, concluding in agreements that brought a fragile peace. The setting is the late 1960s in Northern Ireland. The air is thick with tension, and the streets are becoming a battleground. This is the beginning of a violent conflict that will last for nearly 30 years. The Troubles lasted from about 1968 to 1998, and some elements of the violence originated for sectarian reasons. Some of the players included Protestant Unionist loyalists who wished for Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom, and the predominantly Roman Catholic nationalists who wanted Northern Ireland to become part of the Republic of Ireland. Other players in the conflict included the British Army, as well as the Royal Ulster Constabulary, who attempted to maintain order and peace between the Irish Republican Army, who believed they were engaged in a war for national independence, and the Unionist forces, which viewed the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, as a terrorist group. The Troubles consisted mostly of street fighting, bombings, sniper attacks, and roadblocks. Approximately 3,600 people were killed and over 30,000 were wounded before the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. The IRA was a paramilitary organization whose objectives were to establish a republic, put an end to British rule in Northern Ireland, as well as begin the reunification process of Ireland. The IRA was created in 1919 as a successor to the Irish Volunteers, which was a militant nationalist organization founded 6 years earlier in 1913. The IRA's intent was to use force to undermine British rule in Ireland with a larger objective of creating an independent republic. This objective was also pursued politically by Sinn Féin, which was an Irish nationalist party. Despite the political actions of Sinn Féin, the IRA still operated independently during the independence movement. Tactics included guerrilla warfare, bombings, and assassinations, and these actions were one of the most significant part of their operations. The roots of the Troubles can be traced back to the partition of Ireland in 1921, which resulted in creating a predominantly Protestant Northern Ireland, remaining under the United Kingdom and the predominantly Catholic Irish Free State. This partition led to decades of discrimination against the Catholic minority. Many in the Catholic communities in areas such as Derry, also called Londonderry, and Belfast complained of discrimination by the government and police, which were controlled by the Protestants. This discrimination was one of the reasons a civil rights movement formed in the 1960s and gained traction. This new generation of politically and socially active Catholic nationalists looked to America's civil rights movement as a model for confronting anti-Catholic discrimination. Catholic nationalists began protesting discrimination in areas such as housing, employment, and voting rights. These protests were often met with violent responses from the Protestant loyalist community and the Royal Ulster Constabulary, which resulted in escalating tensions. During this time, the shipyard in Belfast was the largest employer. However, the workforce was made up of mostly Protestants. Elsewhere, in places like the city of Derry, the voting districts were gerrymandered to such an extent that Protestant loyalists maintained political control for 50 years. On October 5, 1968, protesters planned a march in Derry. The intent of the march was to focus attention on discriminatory housing policies and practices that resulted in segregation along religious lines. However, the Northern Ireland government attempted to ban the march, but protesters defied their orders and gathered anyway. As the march got underway, a line of police officers from the Royal Ulster Constabulary began to brandish their batons and charge the protesters. Unable to retreat to safety, the protesters were beaten and chaos erupted in the streets. Some historians mark October 5th, 1968 as the beginning of the Troubles, and the images caught on camera became imprinted in the collective memory of the citizens of Ireland. The violent clash between protesters and police on October 5th increased tensions between the Catholic nationalists and the Protestants and led to more violent confrontations. Another significant and violent clash came on New Year's Day in 1969 in Belfast. This time, the Royal Ulster Constabulary provided an escort for a march that was intended to last several days. One of the protesters reached the Burntolley Bridge. A large group of about 300 people loyal to the Protestant cause began throwing rocks at the protesters, and then rushed the bridge armed with clubs and iron rods. Although the protesters had an escort, the police did not provide protection for the marchers and didn't intervene to try and break up the violence. These clashes eventually led to widespread violence following events like the Battle of Bogside and Bloody Sunday, where British troops killed 13 unarmed protesters. The Irish Republican Army and other Republican groups waged a guerrilla campaign against British forces and loyalist paramilitaries, who also engaged in retaliatory violence. Other historians cite the beginning of the Troubles to events that took place in Derry of August 1969, where loyalists marching in Derry became the catalyst for several days of riots and reprisals. It wasn't uncommon for loyalist groups to regularly hold parades across Northern Ireland. Many of these parades were intended to commemorate Protestant military victories, some of which dated all the way back to the 17th century. However, there was a chapter of Protestants located in Derry referred to as the Apprentice Boys. This chapter organized a parade for August 12th, and part of the parade route passed by a part of town called Bogside, which was mostly Catholic. The residents of Bogside viewed the parade as a provocation and prepared to confront the Apprentice Boys. The residents of Bogside viewed the parade as a provocation and prepared to confront the Apprentice Boys. Residents began barricading streets and made Molotov cocktails. The fight between the Bogside residents and the Apprentice Boys lasted for 3 days. The police attempted to break up the violence, but the Bogside residents resisted and used Molotov cocktails and rocks against the police's efforts to stop the rioting. Although the violence began in Bogside, it spread to others such as Belfast, where loyalists rioted in Catholic neighborhoods and set fire to approximately 1,500 homes. The violence led to the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland on August 14th to request the British government to send the military in to quell the violence. The British military was deployed and at first were welcomed by the Catholic nationalists. However, some of the military's practices while trying to keep the peace were controversial. The policy of internment without trial was one of those policies, where hundreds of people who were suspected of being members of the IRA were detained and imprisoned without due process. In response to the internment without trial policy, the Catholic nationalists organized a protest in Derry on January 30th, 1972. The military was deployed to stop the protest, and when the Catholic nationalists didn't disperse, they opened fire on them first with rubber bullets and then live rounds. Approximately 13 protesters died and 17 were wounded. This event would be remembered as Bloody Sunday. The period from the 1970s through the 1990s in Northern Ireland was marked by not only sectarian violence, but included numerous car bombings and resulted in many civilian casualties. The decades of the 1970s and 1980s saw some of the worst violence. Notable tragic events included the Ilmeg bombing and the Birmingham pub bombings. The conflict spilled over into the Republic of Ireland, mainland Britain, and even abroad.
This afternoon in the House of Commons, Harold Wilson announced still more measures to tighten up security in South Armagh. More checks, more surveillance.
Generals gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses.
There was going to have been an Ulster debate today anyway to talk about the future government of the province. But events in Armagh, the least typical part of Ulster in many ways, have made it specially important. South Armagh down here is almost wholly Roman Catholic, and the border area with the south down here has been a provisional IRA stronghold with ambushes, sectarian killings, ferocious gun battles across the border.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
Here, last year's ceasefire really meant very little indeed. Merlin Rees, the Minister for Northern Ireland, called South Armagh bandit country as the sectarian killings of both Protestants and Catholics spiralled. After the murder of 5 Catholics one night, a week ago today there was the White Cross massacre when 11 Protestants were lined up and shot at an isolated crossroads. After these outrages, the government took the view the immediate task in Armagh was to protect lives.
In the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning.
He'd be asking them to consider a white paper to be published soon which called for more widespread acceptance throughout the community of some proposed system of government and some form of acceptable partnership and participation. Mr. Rees stood firm on British presence in Northern Ireland. He said a British withdrawal would be a grave mistake.
Death and hatred to mankind.
Christmas in Belfast, 1972. Sunday morning outside an army post in Lenadoon Avenue, on the fringes of Catholic Andersonstown. Once a council house, it's now a stockade. It's been shot at, bombed and mortared. Christmas brings the army few tidings of comfort and joy.
Poison in a brainwashed mind, oh Lord, yeah.
The army's role in Northern Ireland is to keep the peace between the Catholics and the Protestants and to defeat the enemy. The Provisionals have 3 battalions in Belfast, a total strength of about 1,500, enough to keep the British soldiers in a state of constant alert.
Politicians hide themselves away. They only started the war.
Are you aware that basically the army isn't wanted here?
Yeah, we're aware of it, yeah. But I mean, but who am I to say, right, pull the army out? I mean, it's not my job to say that. I'm away here. I've been told to be here and I get good money for being here and that's it. I mean, not here in any biased situation. I mean, I'm not for the Catholics and I'm not for the Protestants. I'm just here to do a job, that's all.
Why should they go out to fight? They leave their role to the poor, Lord, yeah.
Paul Young was deployed in 1971, the year the government introduced internment for IRA suspects. The streets were volatile.
Our main fear was people trying to tip our vehicles over because they are quite small, even though they're heavy. But when you've got 50 or so guys around you lifting you up, and again, 10 or 12 people jumping on top of it and trying to do all sorts of things to get their way in, that's scary. You know, that is really, really scary.
Cities were hotly contested. Civilians on both sides, though, were caught in the middle.
Mr. McStefan, what was your reaction this week to the news of the death of a second British soldier?
Well, my reaction as a member of the IRA would be another fatal casualty for Crown Forces, a certain amount of satisfaction. But on the personal level, of course, we realise that this is a terrible personal tragedy for some family, that this is possibly some young woman being left a widow, possibly children being left without a father, somebody's son has been killed. But and this is the whole tragedy of the situation in Ireland. British troops are not wanted, and while they are forced to remain here, against the will of many of them, I'm sure, tragedies like this are obviously going to continue.
Were these deaths an advantage or a disadvantage to the IRA?
The deaths of the British soldiers. I would say that the deaths of British troops in Ireland for the first time in 50 years would be a definite advantage to the IRA.
Time will tell on the power minds, making war just for fun, treating people just like pawns in chess. Wait till Judgment Day comes, oh Lord, yeah.
Our top story is that a man who's confessed to being an IRA bomb maker has told BBC News he was part of the group responsible for one of the deadliest attacks of the Troubles, the Birmingham pub bombings in 1974. Now, Michael Hayes says he was an active volunteer on the night of the attacks when 21 people were killed and more than 180 others were injured.
Darkness, world stops turning, ashes where the body's burning.
In December 1969, the Provisional Irish Republican Army, or Provisional IRA, was born from the widespread religious violence that had racked the 6 counties of Northern Ireland since the preceding August. From modest beginnings, the Provisionals became the most important and dangerous separatist paramilitary group during the 30-year conflict in Northern Ireland, known as the Troubles. By the time the violence ended in the late 1990s, the Provisional IRA had killed more than 1,800 people, roughly half of the victims of the entire conflict.
No more pigs have the power, hand of God has struck the hour. Day of judgment, God is calling, on their knees, the old pigs crawling.
At 2:54 a.m. on Friday, October the 12th, 1984, the Irish Republican Army tried to assassinate the entire British cabinet. They almost succeeded. A bomb had been placed inside the Grand Hotel in Brighton, where most leading members of the Conservative Party were staying during their annual conference. 4 people died, many more were badly injured. It was the most devastating terrorist attack ever launched against British politicians.
Beg mercies for their sins, Satan laughing spreads his wings.
Efforts to resolve the conflict included the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1985, which eventually led to multi-party talks in the 1990s. The peace process culminated in the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, which established a power-sharing government and laid the groundwork for a more peaceful Northern Ireland. The Troubles left a deep legacy with over 3,600 people killed and more than 30,000 wounded. While the peace is largely held, the sectarian divisions and political tensions of the past continue to affect Northern Ireland society. Since the conflict lasted 30 years, it may be difficult to visualize the entire timeline, so for context, I'll cover some notable events, which included the Civil Rights Campaign that lasted from 1964 to 1972. The Derry March of October 5th, 1968. Deployment of British troops from August 14th, 1969. The internment policy, which lasted from 1971 to 1975. Bloody Sunday on January 30th, 1972. The Dublin and Monaghan bombs of May 17th, 1974. The IRA truce from February 9th, 1975 to January 23rd, 1976. The Constitutional Convention from May 8th, 1975 to March 5th, 1976. The Anglo-Irish Agreement on November 15th, 1985. The Homage Bomb on August 15th, 1998. And the peace process from 1993 to the present. Examining the impact this 30-year conflict had on Northern Ireland society makes me wonder if the United States could ever experience a period of intense internal conflict reminiscent of the Troubles, especially when looking at the current state of American politics and the polarizing effect it has on society, as well as other sources of division such as economic, religious, and cultural differences. Perhaps it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination that those issues could culminate into consequences that could seriously affect the social and political stability of our country. The United States of America, with its long history of enjoying a stable government, seems an unlikely candidate for the type of unrest that occurred in Northern Ireland. However, it is possible to imagine scenarios where regional, political, or cultural divisions could lead to a fragmentation similar to the historical balkanization of Southeast Europe. It's not outside the realm of possibility that an American conflict could arise from some of the current deep-seated political, social, and cultural divisions. So, what are possible scenarios where these issues, if left unresolved, could lead to conflict or even balkanization? One scenario might start with beginning in the early 2020s following a series of contentious elections and growing polarization between different political and social groups. The divisions are primarily along ideological lines, with significant tension between progressive and conservative factions, slowly escalating towards violence. Protest and counter-protests become increasingly frequent and violent. Clashes between opposing groups lead to numerous injuries and fatalities. Extremist factions on both sides begin to form paramilitary groups, engaging in acts of terrorism, including bombings and assassinations. These events result in a response by the government to quell the violence. The federal government imposes strict security measures, including curfews and increased surveillance. National Guard units are deployed to maintain order in major cities. Civil liberties are curtailed, leading to widespread criticism and further unrest. These measures further exacerbate tensions within various communities. Those communities become deeply divided, with neighborhoods and even families split along ideological lines. Trust in institutions erode and social cohesion breaks down. Economic hardship also increases as businesses close and investments dry up due to the instability. To counter this instability, various peace initiatives are attempted, including negotiations mediated by international organizations. However, deep mistrust and ongoing violence hinder progress. Eventually, grassroots movements emerge, advocating for reconciliation and dialogue, but they struggle to gain traction amid the chaos. After years of conflict, a fragile peace agreement is reached, similar to the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. The agreement includes provisions for power sharing, disarmament of paramilitary groups, and measures to address the underlying social and economic issues. The country begins a slow process of healing and rebuilding, and efforts are made to promote reconciliation and address the root causes of the conflict. Although the healing process has begun, the scars of the conflict remain, and the path to lasting peace and unity remains long and arduous. Due to lingering resentment and anger, there is no guarantee the peace agreement and the overall unity of the nation will stay intact. As a result of this deep polarization, some parts of the country remain vulnerable to balkanization. If you're unfamiliar with this term, balkanization refers to the fragmentation or division of a region or state into smaller regions or states, which are often hostile or uncooperative with each other. The term is derived from the Balkan Peninsula in Southeast Europe, which has experienced repeated divisions throughout its history. Balkanization can be fueled by conditions such as extreme political polarization, where political discourse continues to become more divisive. And if states or regions begin to feel that the federal government no longer represents their interests, this could fuel secessionist sentiments. Movements such as those in California or Texas might gain momentum, advocating for independence based on political, economic, or cultural differences. Economic disparities between different regions of the country could also drive balkanization. If certain areas feel economically disadvantaged or neglected by national policies, they might seek greater autonomy to manage their resources and economies. This could lead to a push for more state rights or even secession. Cultural and social divisions exacerbated by issues such as gun rights, abortion, and religious freedoms could also contribute to a fragmented future. If these issues become irreconcilable at the national level, states or groups of states with similar values might consider forming their own governance structures that better reflect their beliefs and lifestyles. Environmental catastrophes such as widespread natural disasters or severe resource scarcity could lead to balkanization as well. In a scenario where the federal government is unable to adequately respond to a major crisis, states or regions might take matters into their own hands, leading to a breakdown of federal authority and the rise of localized governance. Another example of balkanization was the decline of the Ottoman Empire in the 19th and early 20th centuries. As the empire weakened, nationalist movements within the diverse ethnic groups of the Balkans gained momentum, leading to a series of conflicts and the eventual establishment of several independent states. The Balkan Wars from 1912 to 1913 further reshaped the region's borders, exacerbating ethnic tensions and setting the stage for World War I. In contemporary discourse, balkanization extends beyond its original geographic context to describe similar phenomenon worldwide. It's used to describe the division of a country or organization into smaller, often antagonistic units. This can be seen in various contexts, such as the fragmentation of political parties, the division of internet communities, and the rise of separatist movements. Balkanization poses significant risks to political stability, economic development, and social harmony. Fragmented regions may face difficulties in governments, as smaller entities may lack resources and cohesion to effectively manage their affairs. Additionally, it can lead to increased conflict and competing interests, and historical grievances come to the forefront. Balkanization is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon with deep historical roots and far-reaching modern implications. While it can allow for the expression of self-determination and the preservation of cultural identity, it also carries the risk of conflict and instability. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected, understanding the forces that drive balkanization is crucial for fostering cooperation and preventing the escalation of regional tensions. The Bosnian War, which took place from 1992 to 1995, was the result of complex historical, political, and ethnic tensions that culminated in one of the most devastating conflicts in European history since World War II. The war was characterized by severe ethnic violence, particularly against Bosnian Muslim civilians, and had a profound effect on the region's political and social landscape. The roots of the Bosnian War can be traced back to the weakening of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia at the end of the Cold War, the death of Yugoslavian leader Tito in 1980 coupled with the rise of nationalism, created a power vacuum and exacerbated ethnic tensions. Slobodan Milosevic's ascent to power in the late 1980s further fueled the flames of nationalism. Milosevic exploited historical grievances and ethnic tensions, particularly among Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks, to rally support for his vision of a greater Serbia. The declaration of Bosnian independence in 1992 was met with violent resistance by Bosnian Serbs who, backed by the Yugoslav army, sought to remain part of a Serb-dominated Yugoslavia. The Balkanization of Yugoslavia, particularly Bosnia and Herzegovina, had lasting impacts on the region. The war resulted in the displacement of over 2 million people, creating a refugee crisis and altering the demographic makeup of the region. The conflict also left deep scars on the collective memory of the people, fostering a culture of denial and glorification of war criminals in some communities. The fragmentation of Yugoslavia into smaller states has led to ongoing challenges in regional cooperation and integration into the European Union. The legacy of the war continues to affect political dynamics, with ethnic divisions still present in the political systems of the successor states. The Bosnian War serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked nationalism and the fragility of multi-ethnic societies. The effects of Balkanization in Bosnia and Herzegovina are a testament to the long-term consequences of ethnic conflict and the importance of fostering dialogue and reconciliation to prevent the recurrence of such tragedies. The Bosnian War was marked by a shocking campaign of ethnic cleansing and widespread atrocities and human rights violations that have left an indelible scar on the region's history. Ethnic cleansing in the Bosnian War began as political upheavals led to the disintegration of Yugoslavia. Nationalist leaders, particularly among the Bosnian Serbs, sought to create ethnically homogeneous territories through the expulsion of other ethnic groups. During this time, paramilitaries initiated a brutal campaign to remove Bosniaks and Bosnian Croats from areas they claimed. The methods employed during this period were brutal and included the killing of civilians, rape, torture, and the destruction of civil, public, and cultural property. The forcible relocation of civilian populations and the looting and pillaging of their homes were also widespread. Most of the perpetrators were Serb forces, and the majority of the victims were Bosniaks. One of the most shocking acts of ethnic cleansing occurred in July of 1995 when Bosnian Serb forces overran the UN-protected safe area and systematically murdered over 8,000 men and boys in what is now recognized as a genocide. The international community's response to the ethnic cleansing in Bosnia was slow and often criticized as inadequate. However, the establishment of the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia led to the prosecution and conviction of several officials for crimes against humanity, including genocide. The atrocities committed during this period not only devastated the lives of millions, but also challenged the international legal and moral framework designed to protect human rights and dignity. The term ethnic cleansing is often associated with the most brutal conflicts of the 20th century. In the context of Northern Ireland, allegations that the Irish Republican Army engaged in ethnic cleansing against the Protestants during the Troubles has been a subject of intense debate and research. The border areas, with their mixed communities, became focal points of tension and violence. Research into the subject by various academics has suggested some of the alleged ethnic cleansing occurred in those border areas during the Troubles. Specifically, there are allegations the IRA systematically targeted Protestant civilians, businesses, and farms to create a homogeneous area aligned with their nationalist goals. Towns like Newtown Butler, which once had a significant Protestant population and businesses, saw a dramatic demographic shift, with the Protestant population dwindling to about 10%. The IRA's tactics reportedly included the use of Protestants as human bombs, forcing them to drive vehicles laden with explosives to army checkpoints while holding their families hostage. This method of terror was not only a military strategy, but also served to instill fear and coerce the Protestant population to leave the area. The alleged ethnic cleansing had a profound impact on the border Protestant community. Families were uprooted and the social fabric of the region was irrevocably altered. The violence led to a sense of abandonment and a loss of trust in the ability of the state to protect its citizens. While some argue that the IRA's actions constituted ethnic cleansing, others contend that the term is too strong and that the violence was part of a broader conflict rather than a systematic campaign against Protestants. The debate over the IRA's intentions and actions continues to be a sensitive and controversial topic in the post-conflict period. The allegations of ethnic cleansing by the IRA against the border Protestants during the Troubles represent a dark chapter in Northern Ireland's history. While the full extent and nature of the violence may be contested, the suffering of the affected communities is undeniable and serves as a cautionary warning for other societies about the dangers of social division. In closing, the scenarios mentioned are purely hypothetical and only intend to illustrate the potential consequences of deep political and social divisions. It's important to remember that real-world conflicts have complex causes and profound human impacts, and we should strive to address differences through dialogue and peaceful means. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for listening.
There is a signal broadcast every second of every day through our television sets.
Mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes.
Science and technology are propelling us forward at accelerating rates.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.